Okay, welcome to Swords and Starships. I am Garrett, and this is the review. Technical difficulties. This is the review of Season 3, Episode 2 of the Orville New Horizons. Uh, Title of this episode is Shadow Realms. Um, so if you haven't seen my first review of Season 2, Episode 1, be sure to check it out. And if you've seen it, then you know I'm pretty stoked on this new season. I think Orville they've hit it way out of the park so far. These first two episodes have been excellent. Season 2, Dark Realms is fantastic. And it is a classic kind of Star Trek episode. And as you know, I have compared this show to the original 5 series of Star Trek and the new Star Trek a lot, contrasted, I should say, to the new Star Trek series a lot. And I think it's important because it's clear to me that Seth MacFarlane's purpose in creating this show is to really um, just have more adventures in space, Star Trek style. I mean, it really is. You can tell he has a great love for what Star Trek is and represents, or at least did represent in its heyday. And, you know, one thing a lot of Trek fans I've heard say is that they think, hey, you know what? Trek had its day. It's over. It's just people aren't that interested in these kinds of stories anymore. It's like this episode of The Orville proves without a doubt that's a bunch of BS. Star Trek is as relevant today as it ever was. It just isn't in the hands of good writers. So, enough about the competitor. Let's talk about Orville Dark Realms. This is such I say it's a Trek-like kind of episode because it's a darker episode. It's a little bit more of a suspense episode. It's a thriller, and Star Trek has always had great thriller episodes as well. I love it when sci-fi that is normally more upbeat or more action oriented. I love an episode that goes in the Halloween direction, and this is definitely one of them. Um, but you don't exactly know it's going that way. I will keep this as spoiler free as I can. There may be spoilers for season 1 and 2 of the Orville, so if you haven't seen season 1 and 2, please go watch it. It's a great series if you love thoughtful, exciting, fun, and optimistic science fiction that's just well written and well acted and great special effects. Watch it. But I'm assuming if you're here, you probably watched this far and you're interested in my thoughts on season 3. So here we go. Dark Realms opens with a great continuation of sort of the running story arc, which is, the Krill were the enemies in season 1 and to some extent season 2. They are this religious species that are super fanatical, and they view all other species as not having a soul. I find this really fun, by the way, because there's this idea of like if we humans discovered another species, alien creatures, it would become an interesting theological question um, for any faith on the planet, I think. But I was raised Christian, and so for me, uh, I remember pondering that as a kid. I'm like, if we discovered, I think I may have even asked the question, though I don't recall the answer of parents or a priest at one point. If we discovered aliens, would they have a soul? Would they go to heaven? Would God, would they? And actually, I believe I remember a deacon once telling me that any being in this universe had to have been created by God, and so essentially his answer was yes, of course they'd have a soul. Um, Other theologians would tend to think. I did once hear this argument. No, it's not possible that there's aliens in the universe because you know the Bible doesn't mention them. Like, okay. By the way, if you're a Christian, you're religious, no disrespect whatsoever. I'm just pondering the interesting implications, depending on. And personally, you know what? This is an interesting take on it. So this particular species, the krill, they've come to the conclusion that any alien species that they discover does not have a soul, and therefore they're not automatically entitled to all the rights and privileges that the Krill are entitled to, which is it's really fun to see that shoe on the other foot, because usually in a science fiction story it's humanity that is portrayed in that role of we're the colonizers, or we're the ones that have the blind spot morally. What's interesting is that, this is kind of us getting a taste of what we imagine might be our own medicine at some point. So the Krill were kind of Cold Warrior. They were in a sort of Cold War with the Union, and the Kalon, that would be the android species to which Isaac, the crew member, belongs. He is one of these androids. They were this other power that the Union was courting to try and make an alliance with against the Krill. Obviously, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen season 2, you've been warned. In season 2, it's revealed the Kalon have judged us, and they have decided that all organic species, humans included, are too much of a threat, and we gotta go. So they're going to commit a genocide. They are attempting to cleanse the galaxy of all organic sentient species. So the Krill have switched sides. Now the Krill are they're our allies, but only because they're the enemy of our enemy. And that's sort of the relationship we have. But it does represent an interesting opportunity. Now that the Krill are allied with us against the Kalons, there's an opportunity to open a dialogue. The Krill are pretty implacable. Because of their belief system, it's hard to even open a dialogue with them, because how do you argue with someone who already at the outset says, yeah, you don't have a soul, anything you say doesn't matter? And that's kind of what they're like. But the interesting thing is, because they're forced into this position of having to be our allies, it's an opportunity, if not a promising one. So the episode begins with negotiations with the Krill. An admiral named Admiral Christie comes aboard the Orville, and he's excited because the Krill, in addition to just being willing to talk to us now, are actually at the bargaining table, and they've decided to open up this whole new region of space that we've been unable to explore because their space is blocking, their territory is in between us and this new frontier. And they're saying, hey, we're going to open up this narrow little corridor between your space and this frontier, and we are willing to allow you passage to explore in exchange for some concessions, and you got to follow the rules. And so that's kind of the diplomatic situation. Meanwhile, Admiral Christie, who is negotiating this deal, turns out to be an old flame of Dr. Finn, and he's kind of interested in rekindling their relationship. And so there's an interesting story developing there. There's pretty hilarious conversation between him and Isaac, who also the android who dated Dr. Finn. And they start talking about their former relationship with Dr. Finn. It's pretty good. But the episode really, I got to just pause for a minute and just point out something about the Orville I love so much. This is what's missing. This was one of my favorite things in Star Trek The Next Generation when I'd be watching it. There's some kind of crisis, or there's some kind of bizarre phenomenon in space, or there's something like this where it's a diplomatic negotiation and it's very delicate. And usually what you'd have is the captain and all of his crew around a conference table, and they would just be discussing things. And it was so interesting to watch them, push and pull and kind of tease out and think through the issue, and then make recommendations to the captain. Well, sir, I think we should do this. And then the other character would say, oh, no, I think we should go the other way. And Worf would say we should raise shields immediately, and they'd immediately say, no, Mr. Worf, be quiet. And then the captain's job would be to sort of weigh the options and decide the best course. And the fun part of it for the viewer was, in my case, you could sort of put yourself in the captain's position and think, what would I do? And it was usually, in the better episodes, it was hard to decide, because it was like, I don't know, they both have a point. The new Star Trek shows don't do that at all. They really don't. There's just not enough time for talk, because they've got more things to shoot and decapitate, and they've got more crying to do, and they just don't have time for nuanced problem solving. isn't a thing. Orville does have time for that, and it's done brilliantly. I have to tell you, it kind of amazes me, even because it's been a while since I used to watch good stories like this. It kind of amazed me how just totally intrigued I was by just this diplomatic negotiation. Because here's the Krill, and they're sitting at the conference table, and here's Admiral Christie and Captain Mercer, and they're negotiating for the exploration rights. And these episodes in Star Trek could be boring at times, because sometimes it was like, if it just wasn't a very interesting situation, sometimes the negotiations would seem a little silly. What I love about this episode is I am deeply invested in these negotiations, because in seasons 1 and 2, Orville did such a good job of carefully setting up the Krill as this suspicious, religiously fanatical race that are very hard to talk to, and up until the Kalon threat, had no interest, like none, in even the most basic negotiations with us. I mean, it was really, and they're pretty cool too. They're a pretty intimidating rival for our protagonist. So it's interesting that they're now in this position where they have to talk to us. These soulless other beings, they have to talk to us. And, maybe we have something to offer them in return. So it's fun to watch Admiral Christie sort of negotiating with them, and they say, well, we want rights to mining this planet. And he's like, oh, I have no problem with that. And like, and you must obey all of our laws. You cannot deviate from this course. And we are willing to allow one ship on a provisional basis may go through this corridor. And if everything goes well, maybe we'll allow more ships in the future. And it's fun. It's fun to see, like, how are these two cultures starting to get along, and how are we going to convince them we're not the bad guys, right? That's what's fun about it. It's like, we're excited for our characters to have this opportunity to convince these xenophobic aliens that we're not the bad guys. It's fun. But what really gets interesting, this is such good writing too. And I promise I'll keep it light on spoilers, but this is really just kind of the Act 1 setup of the show. Suddenly, the captain mentions how excited they are to explore this particular expanse on the other side of the corridor, and how much fun it'll be to map it out. And they said, whoa, 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 whoa. The Krill ambassador's like, you're not planning to go into that expanse, are you? And they're like, yeah, we're explorers. Why wouldn't we? They're like, that place is death. I won't tell you much more about it, but I'll just say they essentially imply nobody goes to that zone of space. It's inhabited by demons. It's a super... It shows you what you can do with actually really well-written dialogue. It's creepy. It's a little bit spine-tingling. And there's even more things that kind of happen later in dialogue that are even better. And it really gave me that old-fashioned feeling I got in a really interesting Star Trek episode when I was just into it. I was like, oh, wow, what are they going to find out there? That is the best. That is the optimal science fiction right there, is when you're wondering, ooh, what are they going to find? Ooh, should they go out there? I love that feeling. This episode has that feeling in spades. So the episode proceeds apace. They do go into that expanse, and they discover something. Much of the rest of the episode, it kind of slowly but surely turns into a thriller. I really don't want to say that much more. I really don't. I want to preserve the mystery of what they find out there. The only spoiler I'll give you is that it's awesome, and I loved it. And once again, if you watch my previous review, you know that one of the things I love and praise highly about the Orville is its very specific use of CGI and special effects. I think we live in an age where CGI is turning into a cartoon. It is removing the limitations that once led to great creativity. When you could only do things through practical effects and pyrotechnics and costuming and makeup and appliances, when that was the only way to create aliens and space battles, it required creativity. And I think what's happened is now CGI, whatever you want, will make it happen. And it's led to really lazy storytelling, visual storytelling. It's led to set pieces that are boring, and yet they shouldn't be because there's all kinds of amazing things happening. And it's like, but it's boring. The Orville uses its special effects to show you something alien, something creepy, something disturbing. It's great. It's really, there's a creature in this episode that is fantastic, among the best creepy aliens I've ever seen, and that goes for the original Star Trek. There's a famous episode of the original Star Trek series that a friend of mine used to really like called The Devil in the Dark, in which Captain Kirk goes down to a planet where a bunch of miners are getting picked off one by some creature in the mines, and they don't know what it is. And it's just a classic creepy kind of episode of Star Trek where it's like, what is this creature that's killing these miners? This episode has a lot. It's in that vein, and it's well done. It's fun. It's suspenseful. I mean, I've been pretty much praising this show to the hilt. I suppose you might be wondering, are there any negatives I can point out? I really don't think so. There was one element of the storyline in this. There were a couple beats of it that were pretty predictable. Not bad. I know I'm being vague. I just don't want to spoil anything for you. I'll just say that, although this show is much better than other shows about oh, look, I'm going to touch that. It's like, don't freaking touch that. You don't know what that is. At least this show, like, there's a great moment where there's a character about to touch something, and the doctor, thank you, the doctor says, don't touch that. That could be, you don't know what microbes could be there. That was good. I like that. Still, there's a little bit of like, should you really be, putting your face that close to that thing? So there's some of that. It's a bit of, but I will say there's always a risk with an episode like this when once you kind of understand the creature or the thing or the threat that you're dealing with, it gets a little less scary, and then the episode risks getting a little boring in pace. I did feel like this episode was paced well, and it didn't overstay its welcome. So I will just say that. I can see how if the action of the episode had run much longer, I might have started to get a little bit disengaged, but pacing in the show is great. It's just a really well put together show. Unsurprisingly, I'll tell you, two of the writers who penned this episode, one of them's Brannon Braga, who is just an OG Star Trek writer. And let me just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, Brannon Braga, for bringing awesomeness to this show. This is real Star Trek, even though it's not Star Trek. And I know I don't mean any disrespect to the Orville by comparing it so often. I really don't. This is not a counterfeit of Star Trek. This is its own show, and it is really excellent on its own merits. It's just that I'm like a thirsty man in the desert who's looking for water, and I finally found an oasis, and I just can't stop talking about how bad it was out there in the desert before and how much I miss civilization. And that's kind of why I keep comparing it. It's like, I'm just so happy. I'm so happy to have this feeling again. I haven't had it with any TV show in 20 years. So it's really meant as a compliment to the Orville that it so well captures what made its predecessors great. Let me just do a quick search here. Brannon. Yeah, so it's writers David A. Goodman and Brannon Braga. And Brannon Braga also helped write Star Trek First Contact, which is my favorite. I think it might be. I think that's my favorite of all the Star Trek films, but definitely my favorite of the Star Trek: The Next Generation films. So, I mean, just classically well written story. The resolution of the episode, the resolution of the episode, how it turns out, I don't know. I mean, I had feelings about it. I'll just say that it was a little unsettling for me, and I can't say much more because I don't want to spoil it. I will just say that there are just aspects of it, and when we maybe as we get down the road and I'm free to give you spoilers, I'll go into more detail about why I feel the way I do. I love that it introduces something new to this universe that's really cool and interesting and creepy, and I'm all on board for that. I just felt like the resolution for some of the characters was a little unsatisfying for me. It was a resolution. It wasn't that they left any plot holes. It just this is just a thing with me. Sometimes there's like a how can I say this without spoiling anything? Sometimes I just don't like the ending. No good reason. Like on paper, it works. Yes, that is a fitting ending to the story. I just don't like it. I'm like, I just don't like that ending. So it's not even really a critique of the writing. It's not. I think the writing was impeccable on this episode. I just didn't quite like the ending, but I do love what it sets up for the future. Um, but overall, this episode for me, I would say 10 out of 10, honestly. My those nitpicks are just that, nitpicks. This is the brilliance of the good writing. On the one hand, this episode explores something totally new. It's literally exploring space and finding out what's out there. And sometimes what's out there is beautiful and wonderful and inspiring, and sometimes what's out there is scary. This is an episode where what's out there is scary. Excellent. Also, on the other hand, it advances the main plot arc of the Kalon Krill human, um, what's the word I'm looking for? The human Krill alliance and the human Kalon, essentially conflict that's going on. So yeah, I really had to work at that. Had to dig down in those neurons. I love it. I love it that this show can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can get a little bit more of the larger story and it's directly relevant to what is also just a self-contained story. And on top of that, we can get the potential for really interesting new antagonists later. It's a threefer. It's a 3-in-1. I absolutely love that. So meanwhile, okay, I swear, this is, just allow me this last one. Meanwhile, on STD, Star Trek Discovery, they attempt to write this season 2 long form plot arc with the angel that does the red signal lights all over the galaxy. And the whole running plot of the whole season is we got to figure out what these signal lights are, and we got to go find them. We got to find out what they mean. And the ending is a confused, muddled, absolute mess that makes no sense. It's totally contrived. It was even boring when they sort of you could just tell that when they were revealing how everything fit together at the end, they were wanting you to just be so amazed by how cool and clever it all worked. Of course, it didn't. None of it worked. It was asinine, and maybe if I do a review of that show, I can tell you why. But I'll just tell you, it's like it was a boring, long-running story that I didn't really care much about. It's amazing to me how this show is able to do more with less. This show is able to have a larger plot arc, but it doesn't even have to spend that much time. It can just advance it in like really interesting, meaningful ways while telling a new story. And I would say, and I have some sympathy for writers that get caught in this trap, because writing is hard. There's no doubt about it. But I think that in our modern fixation on long form stories, which I love, I'm not knocking long form stories, but because every TV show has to be a long form story now, one thing I notice is that writers tend to get too clever by half. They become so obsessed with creating this complex, interwoven plot that's all going to make sense at the end that you know, sometimes they just wind up writing something really boring. And it's like, oh, yeah, this is the episode where I learned the next thing. And it's like, I love how the Orville, it's so much, it does it the right way, which is in an organic way. I am desperate to know how this Kalon thing's going to work out. I am so intrigued by the Krill human alliance. How long will it hold? Will we get a friend out of this, or are we just biding our time until they become our enemies again? Those are all super intriguing questions, but I don't feel denied when they're not spending a lot of time on it, episode to episode. I feel like they're spending just enough time to give me a little bit more that's super interesting and meaningful while also telling a new story. And I just hats off to the craftsmanship of that. Like, that's hard to do. That takes real writing chops. Obviously, Braga's, a veteran. He's this is old hat for him, but still, credit where it's due. That takes skill. That takes craftsmanship. It takes care. Care. That's a word. It takes care to write stories this intriguing. Any show that can make a diplomatic meeting in a conference room on a starship one of the most interesting parts of the episode, and for me, it was, you're doing a great job. So, for anyone who's a fan of STD, I'm sorry there wasn't a lot of explosions flying all over the ship this time, but there was plenty for Orville fans to just really, really enjoy. So, really intriguing episode. I got to tell you, I'm damn impressed. I am damn impressed with the Orville. Seth MacFarlane is just hitting it out of the park, and it just is a show with finesse, and it's fun, and it's real sci-fi, and it's long overdue. So thank you, Seth MacFarlane. Thank you, Brannon Braga and David A. Goodman. Thank you to everyone who is pouring their heart and soul into this show. Just the creatures, the characters, the settings, and the alien things we encounter they're beautiful, they're brilliant, they're interesting, they're new. I can tell that all of you making this show do it with real love and affection for what you're doing, and I just can't understate how lacking that is in other shows. And it's so wonderful to have a show that can tell a scary, creepy, dark story and still be overall an optimistic, fun, and inspiring show. I love a dark story. I really do. And it's just, that doesn't mean that the show has to be nihilistic. It doesn't. And Orville is anything but nihilistic. It's beautiful. If you've been reading a lot of Twitter lately, if the news is getting to you, it's bothering you, you know what? Turn off Raised by Wolves for a minute. Turn off Walking Dead. What's the latest? Maybe hold off on that horror movie tonight. Watch this show. It's you need it. It's therapeutic. And that is what Star Trek used to be. Looking at you, Kurtzman. Yeah. Dear Paramount Plus, please fire everyone associated with current Star Trek, and then beg Seth MacFarlane to teach you how to write. Please. Beg him to teach you what it is to be a writer and a creator and a director and, frankly, an actor. He's a great actor, too. So the guy's like, he's Da Vinci. I don't know. All right. I'm not simping for Seth MacFarlane here. I'm just saying he could teach a master class to some people over at Paramount who sorely, desperately need it. Anyway, that is my review for Orville Shadow Realms. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please do like and subscribe to the channel and turn on the notifications. And if you listened this far and you weren't impressed, hey, you know what? Thank you for listening anyway, and I appreciate it. So let me know in the comments what you think about this episode and what you think about Orville, and if you have any thoughts on the review and what you'd like to see more of. Thank you so much, and I'll see you out there.